Everyone, this is a special webinar that we have for you today here. This is the Greening Healthcare Forum Keynote. This is Dr. Ronald Cohn, President and CEO of Hospital for Sick Children, SickKids in Toronto. And this is a recorded keynote that he gave at the Greening Healthcare Forum, which was December 1st. And it was such an amazing keynote that we decided we should share this with everyone that wasn't able to attend in person. We have representation from across the country and other countries here today. So we're pleased to make this work. And he volunteered to join us with the Q&A after. So it's about a 25-minute recording that we're going to show, and then we'll have your opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Cohn and Kyle from SickKids Hospital. To ask questions, just log them into the Q&A button on the menu, and then we'll get to them as we can. For the Greening Healthcare program, we're pleased to be partnered with CHES, the Canadian Healthcare Engineering Society. And our program sponsors, thank you for their support, which is Ellis Don, Enbridge Gas, Energy Network Services, Save on Energy, Smith & Anderson, and Thermogenic Spoilers. And Greening Healthcare is run under the nonprofit organization of the Climate Challenge Network with technical direction by Interlife. And I believe before the recording, we're going to have Ian say a few words, the Executive Director of the Climate Challenge Network. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks, Michael. And again, welcome everybody to the first event of Greening Healthcare for 2023. We've got big plans and expectations around energy and emissions for the coming year, which we look forward to sharing with you over the next few weeks and getting your input in terms of the directions that we're taking. As Michael said, for this session with Dr. Cohn, we've got checking the registration yesterday, well over 100 people, 6 provinces are represented on this call today, along with our friends from ARCUS in the United Kingdom, looking at the interests of the National Health Service over there. So broad coverage. And again, by way of context for all of these conversations, and this is the beginning of a conversation, it's the continuation of a conversation, as opposed to the end of it. We look forward to hearing from everybody. As Michael says, if you've got questions, please post them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can, and those that we don't, we commit to following up with, and the Q&A document will be part of the record of the whole process. So the core interest, the context of this conversation is around the climate crisis, is around what we see as the urgency of the situation and the complexity of the transition from where we are, from where we have been traditionally, to what the low carbon future looks like. I think everybody by now is conscious of the fact that this change affects everybody throughout all of the healthcare organizations, and it begins with leadership. It begins with champions. It begins with setting the tone and setting the expectations from the top, as they like to call it, the C-suite. And I'm delighted to have this reprise of the annual forum keynote address from Dr. Cohn, who touches on so many of the key issues that every healthcare organization has to deal with as we tackle the requirements here. So we begin all Climate Challenge Network events with land acknowledgement, and we do acknowledge with great respect the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, the Métis, and the First Nations people that share these lands with us. I'm speaking today from Toronto, the traditional home of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And as always, we hope that the work that together with all of you we're doing will contribute to our common responsibility and will be a credit to the roles that we need to play to protect and be stewards. So we'll, without further ado, I think Dr. Cohn by now is known to everybody. We'll switch to the presentation. As Michael mentioned, please put your Q&A in as we go, and we will come to the questions around 12:30 today. Thank you.
So every question you're going to ask me at the end of my talk, I will just move over to Kyle. So get ready. So, when I went into medicine, I had no idea that I would ever care about environmental sustainability beyond what I do at my house, what I do personally in my life. And when I started my work and came together with colleagues around the city, really, and the University of Toronto, I realized that this hospital I am so passionate about is actually part of the problem. And the reason I'm saying this is the following, because there are a number of problems that we face that make it very clear that we are part of the problem. So one is climate change is a threat to health and maybe more importantly to health equity. Climate change is also a threat to the high quality of healthcare that we all want to actually perform at our institutions. And contrary to our mission, what I learned over the last few years is that healthcare is actually harmful for the environment, and the reason for that being is that we have learned now over the last decade, if not longer, that climate change actually affects health. It affects the way how we live our life and how our health is impacted by it. And that is clear by extreme weather circumstances that can impact physical health, but it's also other things that impact our mental health, whether this is food security, whether this is water quality, air quality. These are all important aspects that contribute to health and are part of the climate change issue, the climate health issues. And that's not a problem just for adults. And in fact, I was shocked about a year ago when I learned that about 88% of the burden of disease in children is somewhat related to climate change. 88%. I mean, let that sink in for a second. And then when you look at the future, and as a pediatrician, I talk a lot about try to convince people how important it is to invest in our children, because our children are the future. And nobody ever really disagrees. Very few people actually put words and actions behind this, but that's okay. But then I'm also asking myself, are we actually setting our kids up for failure in this world? So the question then becomes, what is it that we can do to at least be part now of a solution, not just a problem? And I will tell you, I'm the first to admit that I don't have all the solutions, but I will tell you a little bit about the work that we are doing at SickKids, and the work that we are doing with our partners around the Toronto academic hospitals and the university to really think about structurally and systemically about a sustainable healthcare system. And I will say, as much as I value really the partners at the hospitals that we have, the biggest partner that we have here is the University of Toronto. There are outstanding scientists who are very action-oriented, so who do really what I call translational science in climate change, meaning they're doing science, trying to actually translate it into practice. And I have learned so much from my colleagues at the University of Toronto, and we can be lucky to have them here. So what this means really is that we need to think about new sustainability plans at SickKids, as well as the broader community, and need to create a system where we learn from each other. Academic hospitals have a tendency to be competitive with each other, which is really sad, but it's a reality too. But here's one perfect area where we have to learn from each other, work together. And I'll give you a couple of ideas that we have been either thinking and or already working on. So first, let's try to think about how we reduce the harms to care associated with climate change. And what we are really talking about here are emissions that have been created in ways we kind of never really expected or examined. And one example that you're obviously all aware of is how energy plants can contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. But have we really taken a deep dive into thinking about how do we purchase materials, how we think about transportation of our staff, of our patients, of our families, and given some real thought to how this affects carbon emissions. And I would argue that we have been thinking about it, but probably not really thinking about it enough to see whether there's something we can do about it. And I think one of the community of practice that we have created, that we have put together, one of the outputs is a playbook that is not just talking about the problems, but what it is we can do to change some of the things. Another area that is really critical is around trying to develop resilience around climate shocks. We have now across city, as well as collaboration with Mississauga and the provincial government, collaboration put into place to think about what's our emergency preparedness if we actually have to take care of a lot of children who are affected by a crisis that is created by climate change. That is a whole different way of thinking about emergency preparedness other than what we usually do at the hospital, where we think about mass casualties in a car accident or in a trauma or, God forbid, a shooting or so. There are very different principles that have to be in place in order for hospitals to take care of mass casualties that clearly can happen due to environmental conditions, and that have to be in place and that have to be trained and practiced about the same way how we practice a code orange for a mass casualty of a bus accident. So that is now underway, and I think that's very helpful work. Obviously, nobody ever wants to be in a situation to have to use it, but we are at least preparing for it. And then, I know it sounds so simple to talk about protecting nature, but we are probably not really protecting nature. And here I personally believe, and I know Kyle and other members of my team agree with me, there's a certain amount of culture change that you have to go through in an organization. And maybe it sounds, I think there are a lot of people here who are experts and who feel like we have to move beyond culture change. And I would agree, I would disagree with you, because I'm not sure that our staff members at the institution are at the same place that all of you are. So as we think about, there were a lot of culture changes more recently we had to go through, whether it's around equity, diversity, inclusion. That's a journey we have started a few years ago. That's a culture change. That takes time. Whether it's around burnout, wellness, and well-being. We had to accept that, and now we are on that journey too. And that's the same journey around climate change. It's one of these things that people never really think more about past the sentence of, well, it's important, of course it's important. So it's something we are working on, and I think you start by this culture change by talking about it, and then if you find yourself in a situation like our hospital of actually building a new hospital, which I show you a few pictures about in a minute, then you can try to implement some of this thinking in your actions and building a hospital that actually takes these things into consideration. And then the last point, which I think is important, is talking about sustainable development. And part of that means that you have to have a governance structure in place that thinks about this. So our Board of Trustees has agreed and supported that climate change and environment protection is part of our strategic core values now. And that means a lot of interesting things from a board perspective. How are we going to invest money? Are we actually going to take the step and try to keep in mind investing money into companies that might not be environmental friendly? Some fascinating discussions around that happening at our board level, I can tell you, but that's the commitment that our board made, and I think it's important that we have that oversight and commitment from the board, because otherwise we probably won't be able to get there. And this is really Kyle's slide, right? Yes. So So Kyle has taken on the leadership in our hospital to really think about what are we going to do about within the next 3 years at the Hospital for Sick Children. And you can see there's some around the advocacy for climate action. That is something, I don't know how many hospital representatives we have here, that hospitals often don't feel comfortable about. Advocacy is a tricky business. I have learned this throughout the pandemic as we took on the advocacy for making sure that children need to go to school. And that has been a very interesting experience for me personally, as well as for the institution, where we generally are just in the news about good, cool things that we do and cool research, and thinking that we do the right thing about asking for kids to go to school, which seems like a no-brainer to me, has caused a lot of controversy. So similar around this, it will be the advocacy around climate change, because it will affect a lot of people in a negative way that may not want to be affected in a negative way. Then we need to think a little bit about what are we going to do today that will help us address the tomorrow, and then again establish some structures within the hospital. So Kyle has brought forward a very detailed plan of how are we going to resource this with people who are the experts, who can support him and his team, so it's not on the shoulders of people who have 50 million other things to do. So that's an investment that we are currently considering in a stage-wide process, but is something that we have to do, otherwise you can't do this at the side of your desk, right? And although Kyle is a magician doing lots of things, but we're not going to ask him to do that too, just to oversee it and lead it. But there are a couple of things that we have already done. One is around virtual care, which I'll tell you a little bit about. One is around the operating room, and then one is around the sustainable practices and infrastructure that really speaks to the new building that we are building. But let's start with virtual care. So we have started to think about virtual care before this miserable pandemic started, but one of the silver linings of the pandemic was that we had to implement it within about 7 to 10 days, which would have taken us, I think, usually 18 months. So we have done this, and there are obviously two components to the strategy. So if you think about it, one is it's a convenient factor for parents and their children. Sometimes you don't need to see a child and put your hands on a child to have an important discussion about results, for example, that have come back, or about just an update on children, particularly the children I see in my clinics. I don't have to really examine them every 6 months, but I need to talk to them every 6 months. So think about the fact that families are now being able to virtually join without driving to SickKids, without parking, without all the time away from school for the children. The children don't like it as much, but because they like missing school, as you can probably imagine. But so there's the convenience factor of it, and then obviously it's an unbelievable reduction in driving. So we had 7,500 virtual visits. So think about how many cars have not been driving to SickKids just through this, and we will continue to put a lot of effort into this, and our aim is to have 30% of our visits to be virtual on an ongoing basis, which will be amazing. I think we'll be able to do it, but it was a big culture change for people to get used to talking to parents through a video. It's not easy. It's a different skill that nobody really had, that we all had to learn. So the other one is around the operating room, and while I hope nobody here in this room has to ever end up here, but once in a while that is necessary, and we really don't think about so much what kind of things are happening in an operating room that harms the environment. So we have the Operation Green team that we put together at SickKids, as well as within the 1,000 hospitals, the academic hospitals, together with the university, and we are already making progress in thinking about what kind of anesthetic gases do we need to use, and do we need to use them at all. There are lots of medications right now that actually make you go to sleep without using any gases. What are the reusables that we can use? What's the other general waste and energy management? So there's another playbook that we have developed that I find, I consider this one of the low-hanging fruits of what we can do, similar to the virtual care. Other things are more structurally complex, but this is a low-hanging fruit. And then it's our, what we call Project Horizon. It's the redevelopment of our campus, which is one of the most complex things you probably have ever heard about, because we are not building on a green site, we are building on site. And I show you a couple of pictures about this in a second. So we are building the hospital for the future that will allow us to transform the care that we deliver. And that is really very patient-focused in trying to ensure that parents are actually part of the building process, and we listen to them, what it is that they need, what their children need, because we don't know that. We think often we know it, but we actually don't. So, and one of the core principles of Project Horizon is the sustainability aspect of what we are trying to do, and I think it has so far been already very successful, but this is how this is going to look like. So on your left side, you see the current state of what this is, what we are currently operating in, and then you see that there's a massive development happening here again with building a new patient care tower that's about 10 years away. And then there's this building called PSC, if you see it. That's an administrative office building that we probably move into, well, not probably, we'll move into sometimes next year, that will allow us to demolish parts of the current hospital so we can build the new hospital. And this is like an artist rendering of how this looks like. And what I'm not going to go through all of this other than trying to show you. Do I have a? Oh, that doesn't work. So I guess you can see the green spaces. Please look at the green spaces, and please appreciate the green spaces that we don't have right now. There's no green space anywhere attached to the hospital except for a little bit of a front lawn that's not really considered a green space. So we are building green space in the new hospital as well as on top of the new administrative office building that will be obviously environmentally friendly, but it's also part of our wellness strategy. And I can tell you some of our staff members have seen the green space already on the top of the new building, and everybody's already thinking about how great it will be to go out there. Unfortunately, we live in Toronto, so it's only for 6 months of the year, but that's fine. So what are other things that we are focusing about as we think about moving into this new building? So obviously the first step is to make sure that our building partners are focusing on environment, and then together we really have a goal to become an LEED gold standard building for this administrative building that we are building right now. And there are other aspects that are critical, particularly as it relates to what are we going to do with all this demolishment and waste that we are creating. And I have to really commend our team in doing a lot of research trying to make sure that we do that in the most environmentally friendly way. So here you have our, that's this office building. There you can see at least a little bit of a sign of the green space. But there are many other things that we are trying to do in this building that are focusing on the environment. So one of the key areas is the heating and the cooling of this building. So for heating, for example, we are connecting to a district energy system that generates steam. And for cooling, we are using deep lake water cooling as well as an intelligently designed building envelope, which is fairly sophisticated, to make sure that we shade the building from the sun. So I have to say I learned a lot about this when it was presented to me the first time. It's a really cool system. You agree, Kyle? And you agree? Okay, good. I just need to make sure my team thinks I'm saying the right things. Anyway, we are also, though, paying close attention to water usage and conservation in terms of stormwater that will be collected and used for irrigation or in toilets that will be all low flush. And then you see the green space that I talked to you about. All right, so what have I learned? I've learned a lot. The interesting thing is often people ask me, how do you like being a CEO? Particularly as a physician, I kind of never thought I would do something like this. I don't think I've ever learned as much in my life as I have learned in the last 3.5 years, and that says a lot for somebody who went to medical school and lots of training, 11 years of training before I ever had a real job in my life. So one of those learning areas is what we are talking about today, because I'm not sure I appreciated until a few years ago how much of health or disease is actually impacted by the environment of what we see in our children. And so I'm a geneticist by training, and so I know a lot about what the DNA code is contributing to disease. I've also learned, before I started to think about this, that the environment can impact the expression of genes, not in terms of altering the gene expression, but it can turn off and turn on certain genes that have impact on health. But what I really have learned, and what I really personally am very passionate about, is what happens in the environment of a child. So we have this tagline around our vision for an individualized, precise approach to children care that goes all the way from the genetic code to the postal code. And I think that is the key to really providing truly individualized care if we take into account where does a child live, what does a child eat, where does a child go to school, what was the pregnancy of the child, what was the mother's exposure to the environment that we know impacts the fetus and the development of the fetus that can have impact on health outcomes after the baby is born. If we take all of this together with what we know about genetic code and all sorts of other physiological data, then we're going to end up providing truly individualized care, and that's a paradigm shift of clinical care that we are trying to embark on. So I leave you with these last few thoughts. And I'm so relieved that my team is here, because if you have questions that I cannot answer, I'll defer to them. But I thank you for having me come and speak here. I just leave you with the last quote here. I think a lot of young people are really thinking and acting on environmental matters. Not just the individual who is very famous, but lots of other children. My son is talking about it in high school. So if they do this, then let's follow them, and let's make sure that we do right by them. Thank you.
Dr. Cohn, thanks for the reminder of the breadth of the issues that you addressed there. Just to regroup, and then I'll share with you a little bit about the audience that you're responding to questions from today, and then we'll ask Michael to pick some questions. But thinking again and hearing again your messaging, you certainly covered energy, you covered resilience. Who'd ever heard of a climate-induced code orange before? That struck home with me. Talked about culture change, and you talked about deeper thinking and thinking being turned into action. You talked about governance, you've talked about advocacy, and obviously you've talked about facilities and the excitement about Project Horizon. The audience today includes board members and clinicians, as well as facility staff. The large majority of the participation today is from hospitals. So let's let's dive in if we can to the questioning. And Michael, can you kind of pick from everything so far the first question to pose to Dr. Cohn or to Carl Robinson as the Director of Facilities Operations, Sustainability and Support Services?
Sure. Okay, we'll start with speaking of sustainability. We have a question here regarding that. So the question is, was a separate sustainability consultant or designer hired to incorporate sustainability into the project, or was the work done by the same engineers, architects that were designing the building? And has an energy consumption or carbon emissions target been set for the new building?
Kyle, I'm going to defer this one right to you.
I'll take that one. So yes, correct. There is a separate sustainability consulting firm that was a part of the RFP and the design team that's a part of this. And then of course, like most large projects like this, they work in step by step with the architects and designers for that. We do have an energy model that we're using, and with this building as well as that, we have something that we're referred to as a building intelligence platform, which will help with their energy management. That will use that energy model and consumption or reduction actually of GHGs to help us monitor the building, make changes to help us reduce our energy consumption and the impact to the environment. So that was all taken into consideration, and we're looking future forward by using this technology to help us understand how our equipment is running, how we're using the building in regards to occupancy sensors, and how that data can really help us, as I mentioned, get our energy usage under line.
Okay, and there was another question here regarding the new build, so I'll just lump this in. Was SickKids seeking the WELL certification with the new builds?
It's something we're looking at right now. It's a part of it right now. We're going to, with this building will be LEED. As you know, that's part of LEED, WELL is part of LEED from there. Separately, no, but I think for the future for PCT and the rest of our campus, these are all taken under consideration as we move forward.
Great, and this one's a bit of a lengthy question, so give me a second here. How does SickKids integrate the future forward leadership skill competencies that face climate breakdown requires of us? Skills such as anticipation and uncertainty, crisis management, fast decisions with partial information. One part of this that you mentioned is updating emergency preparedness plans, but my understanding of these plans is that they tend to focus on the data from past events where climate change asks you to anticipate the future in novel ways. Is this something you and your leadership team are considering?
So I'll start, and maybe Kyle, you can add to this. So as a hospital, we have formally entered our caring safely journey several years ago. And that was really formalizing a culture around quality and safety. And part of this work has led to a very formalized way of preparing for different kind of emergency and having actually an emergency preparedness plan in place for as many emergencies that we can anticipate. I mean, the latest we had to deal with was a cyber attack just a month ago, and we had a playbook in place, and that helped us go through this. And we will be doing the same thing. I mean, in my talk, I mentioned this under the umbrella of the Code Orange, but we will be developing a very detailed playbook, I mean, as much as you can, to be prepared for any kind of emergency that could be related to an environmental emergency. And what I'm confident about is that I know we'll get there because we have such tremendous, vast experience from developing these playbooks for all sorts of other situations. And as you develop then these playbooks, that leads into like formally teaching our faculty members and our staff members to think about environmental challenges. So we are not quite there yet at a point where I would say every staff member is going through formal education of sustainability, but it's becoming part now of educations for residents, for example, and fellows. It's becoming part of education of undergrad students who want to go into medical school. So I would anticipate within the next 5 years, there will be lots of formalized training, but there will be lots of on-the-go training over the next few years as we implement their plan.
Yeah, I'll just dovetail to what Ronnie said there, very well said as usual. Future planning is very much a part of this, and climate resiliency has been the best ways to address this. And so we start from the built environment to make sure that the buildings that we're building today, as we're doing renovations to our existing hospital and campus, that they're able to keep up with what's been happening. As we all know, the 100-year storm is now turning into the 10-year storm, unfortunately. The weather patterns are changing. And one of the most important things for us as an institution in healthcare is being able to provide that healthcare in the worst circumstances. And that's what Ronnie alluded to in regards to a code orange. So first and foremost, it's the infrastructure that does that and how we operate those buildings. But exactly after that, everything Ronnie mentioned in regards to that training. The inspiring part about SickKids right now is that so much environmental sustainability has been happening at the side of the desk of staff members here. Is really formalizing that and continue to build on top of that, and incorporating not only from the built infrastructure climate resiliency, but also how we provide the clinical services that impact the environment. And that's where the staff are very excited. A shameless plug, today is the official launch of our environmental sustainability strategy, which Ronnie, my boss, Lori Harrison, and all the executives and the board have been very, very supportive of, and I'm very excited to know that has been officially launched, and just very proud of the team that helped put this together, and grateful for Ronnie's leadership to make sure that it happened. That really talks about that fostering and what Ryan's been talking about of the environmental responsible culture. That's how we'll get that. But I think as Katie asked that question, that's how we're future planning, and I believe we will be successful.
Yeah, Kyle really has developed this. As I said during my talk, and go all to social media. There's a great video with him and about our initiative. It was good timing that we launched it today.
So the next question is, what accountability and metrics scorecard does the SickKids board and executives use to track progress towards environmental goals?
So these are scorecards and metrics that we have developed as part of the strategic plan. So we don't have them all in place quite yet. We have a few under specific programs. And but I think there will be a much more fulsome scorecard in place. But around some of the ones I mentioned, we have them and we share them with the institution and the board.
Correct. We have our waste already in there, our GHCs. And once again, I do love SickKids. I know I'm talking a lot, but they come back every year and they do come back and ask for suggestions of what can else be added from a KPI scorecard. And that's much more different than a lot of the institutions that were before. They come back and want to review and revisit that. But right now, our waste and our GHDs are on there, is up right next to our clinical scorecards. So that's something great to know.
Okay, so next is, what advice would you have for an individual employee who cares and wants to get involved or make a difference at their hospital for the environment?
Well, find somebody who is doing the work, is leading the work, and reach out to them, and or guys, find someone like myself who doesn't necessarily have the expertise but the passion, then can refer you to the right people. I give you one example. I had a discussion, I don't know, 2-3 months ago with a surgeon from our ENT group, mainly around work with indigenous communities. And all of a sudden he told me he's incredibly passionate about sustainability and environmental impacts on healthcare. I'm like, oh my God, who would have known? Because I didn't. And so I immediately connected him with members here within the hospital and within the Toronto academic hospital community. And I think it's a topic that we just don't talk often enough about. And once you start talking about it, you will actually realize that there's a whole cadre of people who are passionate about it. And there's a whole cadre of people who are actually experts in this. And once you bring them together, that's how you create momentum, right?
I would just don't give up. It's not easy, but don't give up on those initiatives and pushing for the betterment of your hospital and your organization. You will find there's like Ronnie out there, but don't give up to whoever who said that. Keep going.
And Michael, picking up on the forum, the clinicians' representation, I think if people want to take a look at the recording of the original forum, they'll hear from Miles Sargent, who is a clinician heading up PEACH. So if clinicians who we see having a great undisclosed passion for this area is do no harm, there are forums out there of folks just like you that would like to engage between hospitals and share experiences and share opportunities around this. So PEACH, P-E-A-C-H, is one of the environmental organizations established to help clinicians get involved.
Okay, so the next question, how will sustainability change your procurement methodologies around purchasing long-term value for money versus lower cost items to fit within smaller budgets and or annual spends?
Kyle, do you want to take that?
Yeah, we already have one in place, and we're working on addressing and adjusting our existing green policy. Ronnie, which once again I love, and myself are part of. Ronnie's one of the executive sponsors for the Tanzan Community of Practice for the hospitals here, and looking at improving our procurement policies and how we can do that, and the influence that hospitals have, that healthcare has on changing how vendors, how manufacturers produce and do and package, not just for the clinical side, but also from the research side. So these things can be done. And this is what's being looked at already to kind of say, how do we leverage our spend? How do we leverage our influence on those that provide the services and the materials to us? And how can we change that? This is probably one of the most difficult parts of environmental sustainability, balancing fiscally what you need to spend and procure versus sometimes when you get things that are better for the environment, they do cost more. So we're looking at a risk-based approach and working with our counterparts to see what has worked, what hasn't worked, to develop those policies. But definitely it's already started and it's moving towards there. We've heard good feedback in regards to the vendors and those providing the goods. They also want to make change. But TANS is looking at this on a holistic standpoint. As I mentioned, together, I think we get a better chance of doing that from a procurement standpoint.
Great. In the presentation, you mentioned advocacy. What should CEOs advocate for and to whom to accelerate progress?
Well, first, I think you need to start with a commitment to include this into your values and the strategies of the hospital. Once you do that, then you can go out there and speak about it and probably start by educating people. I don't know how many people know about some of these very obvious impacts that the environment has on health, and some of the very obvious impacts that what we do in healthcare is damaging the environment. I did this experiment about a year ago with friends of mine who are not within the healthcare field and who are physicians or healthcare professionals. And I would say 80% of people had no idea that operating an operating room has multiple factors that have a negative impact on the environment. So, I mean, every advocacy starts with education. And I think there's a lot of education that we can do as healthcare leaders, like Kyle and myself, And then you create the awareness, and then you go into the next step of advocating for a change of practice.
So next question, when you look at the climate risk resiliency of the new building, what are the highest risk you identify, such as extreme cold or heat or floods, and from the system level, mechanical, electrical, or structural?
Electrical is one of the highest risk, I believe. Building failure from an electrical standpoint, and I know you're fed from the grid, and this is why we've been partnering, for lack of a better word, with Toronto Hydro, and we meet with them to kind of understand the resiliency of their own system, some of the challenges there, of course, and then of course heating and cooling, and making sure that we're able to do that. We're seeing, it used to be a couple of years back, that 40-degree weather in the summertime, maybe once or twice through that summer. I think this past summer we had for 2 or 3 weeks. It'll probably get worse. Our winters, we can all see, are not the same and unpredictable. So all these things are being looked at from that design standpoint. And as I mentioned before, this building intelligence program, a platform that we're implementing, will help us understand what's happening with our systems and equipments as we're seeing these spikes, and preparing us to also address how efficient our equipment's working. Building infrastructure is very important for brand new buildings to make sure that they can, from a structural standpoint, deal with the potential flooding, the rooftops. Anyone that's on the operation side knows you got to make sure that water is getting off and being drained accordingly. And some of the things that Ronnie showed in regards to the green roofs will help with that. And not only providing spaces for our staff, our patients, but also help address those big time floods and getting that water off our roofs in a way that's sustainable.
So next question, where do you see the biggest hurdles or resistance, and where is the greatest influence and leverage affecting progress towards sustainability?
So one is cost. That's not resistance necessarily, but it's a barrier. As Kyle pointed out, whether it's around procurement or many other practices that you have to implement that are going to change the cost structure. So that for sure is a barrier. I think the other barrier is change management. We have to do things differently. If you look at virtual care as an example, there was no choice that there was no choice for us to do anything different. I can promise you, if we had gone through our process of virtual care implementation, not only would have taken it longer, but it would have been exponentially more difficult to convince people that that's the way to go. And I think as you try to implement changes not under the umbrella of a crisis or an emergency, you'll have to get people on board and have them practice differently at times, and that's going to be difficult. That's why I come back to my answer from the previous question. You have to first educate people how much of an issue this actually is and how important it is for us to play a role. And this is, I think people superficially think that this is all related to cars and oil, and it's such a deeper problem that most individuals are not aware of. And it's not a critique of anybody, but I think once you then explain to people, this is the reason why we are doing this, and that's the reason why you need to change certain ways, how you have been doing things maybe for 10, 20, 30 years, then you get them on board. But that's for sure a barrier. There's no question about it.
No, definitely. I think just to add to what Ronnie mentioned, I think it's the easy way out is saying it's competing priorities, but how I look at it and talking with Ronnie is the integration of those priorities and seeing how they can be done together. You can be sustainable and still deliver quality healthcare and get the equipment systems that's needed. Partnership is always with the support we can get from the ministry, et cetera, but also working together with private organizations in good ways. But I really think my job is to really work with the institution to help them see that integrating our priorities is how we can get to this and address the needs that are needed.
Could I pick up on that with you, Kyle, for a moment? What are the challenges? As you say, you're trying to change a whole system here. This is not the way things have traditionally been done. Where is the biggest challenge in, if you like, overcoming resistance? And it's not bad intentions, it's just this is not the way we do things. And where's the inspiration comes from? Where are the champions? Where have you found the leverage that's helped you do your job in again, moving a really big ship to a significant degree in a short time?
It's knowing that Ryan and our senior leadership team really do support this.
Right.
When you see their eyes and you see that they know, and you also know the challenge that they have in regards to all the other financial constraints that the healthcare system's seeing, and trying to figure out where is the priorities. That's where I go, okay, number one, I have a fighting chance. And I shouldn't say I. When I say I mean my whole entire team, because those who are the decision makers really want to see this change happen. What they need is information and the knowledge of how to make it happen. And as I mentioned, I think the path towards that is integrating and be able to show them, and also those who report to them who have those priorities that they want, that we can integrate those. So when we are going to do updates and renovations to buildings and spaces to make it more viable, to support expansions for clinical services, these are opportunities from a built environment that we can improve the air handling. I saw a question about indoor air quality. That's the timing. Changing what we're doing in our ORs and working with the green OR team and those advocates who believe there's a way, that's another way from there. It's been awesome working with our researchers over at PT-CRL and seeing their enthusiasm in regards to knowing that, hey, there's an environmental impact, but what can we do differently? So we initiated changing the packaging of how we receive certain things and working with those vendors. So once again, it's integrating and allowing us to do what we need to do, but finding ways to be more cost efficient. I know sometimes you guys spend a little bit more money here, but there's a savings down the road and be able to prove that. So, but without seeing the true dedication and people really wanting to do it, I think my challenge would be a lot greater. But so far, it's been very positive.
So the next question here, paraphrasing a bit, but is there any government support that you're receiving that the public wouldn't be aware of, such as educating your employees further, funding your projects, or any other means of support?
So we don't have direct government support at the moment for some of these activities. What there is if you enter the realm of knowledge translation and research, you do have quite a bit of federal grants that are currently supporting either postdocs or trainees to do research in this area. But we don't have systematic support from our provincial government to our operations budget. So I think part of the strategy will, and the KPIs that were previously mentioned, is to go through a period of time to demonstrate the success of it, and then convince government that this needs to be addressed financially and supported financially in different ways than it is right now. I mean, there are certain requirements, obviously, that government puts on you when you build and so on, but the innovative, new, creative thinking and ways of doing certain things that we haven't been doing before, I would say we are a little bit away from that.
And I guess this next question kind of follows on the work we've been doing the past couple of years, where we've continually shown that Humber River Hospital is pretty much by far the top acute care hospital. The question is SickKids looking to unseat Humber River as the most energy efficient hospital in Canada?
We are competitive, but not that competitive. If we can all get to the level and continue to grow from that, it's all good.
I would like to.
All right, Kyle wants to, so then let's say yes to that. That's our goal.
The next question, what forums are there for collaboration and sharing among hospital CEOs?
So the most active current forum exists for the Toronto Academic Hospital group. I think I mentioned this in my talk, but Kyle just mentioned it. I'm co-chairing the Sustainability Working Group together with Stanley Brown, who's Dean at the Dalarna School of Public Health. And here, that is the group that really brings all these hospitals together right now. So if the question is coming from someone who is not part of the system, just email me and I can still connect you to our working group, and we can share materials or anything you're interested in.
The next question is, this is sort of related to the one that was about the emergency preparedness, but is there anything that can be learned from the pandemic experience in terms of future risk?
Is that particularly related to environmental?
Yeah, the indoor air quality specifically.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure other than the virtual care. Kyle, please go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry, my apologies.
No, go ahead, please. I'm not sure I have an answer, a good answer to this.
I think it's twofold. I think it goes back to that future planning. My personal take, once again, you go back to the pandemic and using this as an example. The last big one was 100 years ago, but that information helped, but couldn't prepare us to what we saw. And I think the difference we saw was the impact to supply chain, which was much different to what happened 100 years ago. Looking at in regards to climate resiliency and being prepared for that aspect, yeah, it's everything we talked about. We need to plan, we need to mitigate risk from that standpoint. Understanding that what may happen today, what we learned, will be different. And so what can we take from our past, which is always very important, learn from your past, but build upon that and don't be reactive, be proactive. That's the real key to success and making sure that we mitigate that risk, is to be proactive through strategy, planning, and implementing. In regards to indoor air quality, yeah, it's something that's a big challenge right now. It's a necessity. And what we need goes back to procurement, more efficient systems. Anyone that works in mechanical knows this. You know, the filters, they're more expensive. It's a drain on energy, but these things are necessary. But the more efficient the systems are, the better your systems are from a preventive maintenance aspect versus the reactive maintenance aspect. This will help keep that indoor air quality where it needs to be, but also allow us to do it more efficiently, therefore reducing the environmental damage that it does cause.
Michael, looking at the clock, I think we need to draw the Q&A together. I think you were planning that anyway, but let me just offer first a reminder to everybody that those questions we haven't reached here, we will include in the Q&A report coming out of this session, as well as the questions that have been asked already. This session is being recorded. It will be available next week on the Greening Healthcare website. So if there are any pieces that you need to share with others or remind yourself of, please do that. The purpose of this session, and again, the reason we found it quite inspiring, Kyle and Dr. Cohn, was to inform, because we get questions all the time from the leadership levels of hospitals. So to inform, to present ideas, to present what's actually happening in the field, and to provide inspiration. You've more than met that mandate on all three fronts. On behalf of everybody on this call, and again from the December 1st forum, let me again thank you both for taking the time to do this, for sharing with a lot of candor in places your experiences and your thoughts and your ideas, which everybody will take away from here. So once again, a silent virtual round of applause coming from everybody on the call today. Our thanks for this. To everybody else, please stay tuned as the Greening Healthcare program unfolds over the balance of 2023. We feel a very deep sense of urgency and responsibility to further accelerate greenhouse gas emissions. And as things always work, we're grateful to everybody for the work that you've done in the past several years, driving really significant energy reductions, utility cost savings, and importantly, emissions reductions. But the best is always yet to come. So great expectations for 2023. Again, thank you to Kyle and to Dr. Cohn, and please stay tuned and we'll be in touch as the year unfolds. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for inviting Colin. So thank you.
Thank you.